Upon hearing the word Skyrim, what is the first image your mind conjures? I'd imagine that, like me, you envision the cloud-piercing, snow-drenched mountains that the province is best known for. Perhaps you reminisce about your first time entering some of its most iconic cities, like Whiterun, Solitude, maybe even Windhelm, or meeting some of the more interesting characters within. And how about dragons? I think it's fair to say, with Skyrim being re-released numerous times, that these flying Deathbringers are permanently etched into our brains. Dragons deserve a video of their own, and are clearly popular for a reason, though I do think they can overshadow many of Skyrim's less powerful, albeit equally fascinating beings. Today we'll dive into the juiciest facts and theories surrounding the mysterious origins and behaviors of some of the province's most interesting animals, creatures, and monsters. Scholars may even call some on our list races, but if the denizens of Skyrim can consider them a threat in need of a hired blade, then they're fair game. If you want me to cover even more creatures in a part 2, leave them down in the comments because I'd be very keen to explore even deeper. For now, you must know that saber cats might be much more than you think. That ice wraiths seem to have a terrifying way of reproducing themselves, and that giants are not merely free tickets to outer space. In fact, I can tell you now that the giants lore we're about to cover ends up getting weirder than ever. But before we uncover the juiciest lore, I want to let you know that we've been fortunate enough to have a sponsor for this deep dive, War Thunder. Available now for free on PC, PlayStation, Xbox, or mobile. This has got to be the most comprehensive vehicle combat game ever made, with over 2,500 tanks, planes, helicopters, and ships of 10 major nations to take command of. My favorite thing about it is the attention to detail that went into intricately modeling each vehicle down to its individual components. From the biplanes and armored cars of the 1920s to the fighter jets and tanks of today, they're all susceptible to realistic damage displayed through an impressive X-ray view that shows the exact destruction you've dealt or received. This complex damage system rewards being tactical and disabling enemy vehicles through precision instead of some sort of simplified HP hitbox system. War Thunder even has an all-new mobile version available on iOS and Android, so you can enjoy its familiar, massive multiplayer battles on the go, with intuitive controls, authentic sounds, and awesome graphics. There's simply no game better suited for fans of military history. Use our links in the description or pinned comment today to join a community of over 95 million players worldwide in epic PvP battles on PC, consoles, or mobile. New players and those returning after not playing in the last 6 months will receive a chunky bonus pack for PC and console only, including multiple premium vehicles, the exclusive Eagle of Valor vehicle decoration, 100,000 Silver Lions, and 7 days of premium account use. It's available for a limited time only, so be quick. Best considered a race of often misunderstood beings, Skyrim's giants are as iconic and mighty as they are strange.
I once paid 3,000 gold for this fungus that grows in giants' armpits. I couldn't stand up for days. There's nowhere as good as this stuff.
In addition to their narcotic armpits, giants' very blood can be used to make potions, at least in Daggerfall, and their molars, thumbs, and feet, or their big toes at least, have unique properties sought by alchemists for errors. A tie-in book released with the Elder Scrolls Online called Agents and Reagents, The Bounty of Mundus, recommends to keep the nail intact, as well as any grime, nail fungus, and other detritus, just in case you ever attempt to harvest a giant's toe. While some mammoths are wild and untamed, and have even been used long ago by some reachmen as siege beasts, they are best known as the creatures that travel alongside giants. The relationship between giants and their mammoths has been described as one of mutual benefit, and both will come to the defense of the other if threatened. Giants: A Discourse by Cord the Curious states that these solitary, simple beings don't herd mammoths, but seem able to communicate with them. The giants protect them, and in return they get milk, cheese, and companionship. On occasion, I have seen a giant eat a mammoth, he says. The meal was conducted with reverence, if such a concept can be applied to a simple giant. In Kyne's Challenge, A Hunter's Companion, another tie-in book released as part of the original launch of the online game, the author writes that the meat giants occasionally butcher rangers from carrion to easily trapped skeever. A giant would sever his own finger to add to a stew before slaughtering one of his woolly beasts. You get the idea. However, as much as they respect mammoths, the herding idea that Cord denies isn't exactly baseless. The giants engrave symbols on their mammoths' tusks, seemingly to denote ownership, and I can't imagine they'd happily let one wander off after claiming it. Their use of symbols is also present on the rocks around their camps, and even extends to the artistic scarification covering their skin. It is undoubtedly a sign of their unique culture and intelligence. They are able to make clothes, decorate, craft weapons and tools, and even harness fire. While they respect their mammoths, they're still willing to grind their tusks into a fine powder, sourced from a dead mammoth, I'd assume. Mammoth tusk ivory is said to be as hard as iron, and the powder giants can turn it into is so fine that in the White File quest, it is able to be infused into the lattice of packed snow, producing the strength of the hardest steel. I do like to imagine the giants simply used their insane strength to grind down the powder to such a quality not possible for men to replicate. Giants A Discourse also states that giants demonstrate intricate beliefs regarding death. They have places set aside as sacred burial grounds. When a giant is sick or dying, he or she goes to one of these places to die. If a giant dies elsewhere, other giants make sure the body gets to the burial ground. They don't live near these sacred locations, and they don't guard them. They simply make use of them. Guards in Skyrim can tell you to tread carefully around Secunda's Kiss, as the giants hold this site sacred. While we don't see giants dying there in-game, one could assume it is a burial ground. There's a main area bordered by a circle of stones, and then the actual campfire area, which appears rather separated, seemingly distinguishing the two zones, as one for living, eating, and so on, and the other for sacred matters. One could easily view it as a burial ground for mammoths, though their bones are seemingly placed with respect around many giant sites. While they usually keep to themselves, some giants, like some men, are simply more inclined towards violence. Besides instances of bothering farmers or terrorizing citizens and visitors, as is the claim in the Kill the Giant bounty quests, the text, Sovngarde, a re-examination, claims that based on letters detailing correspondence between a medium and the ghost of a Nord warrior named Rolf the Large, that a band of giants attacked him, and after his quick death, they proceeded to play catch with his head, something he witnessed in ghostly form as he drifted away to the heavens. Then again, with Nords having brought similar violence to the giants, even fashioning measuring sticks from their bones, some would argue it's hard to blame them. They even hunt their mammoths, and in the Second Era, baby mammoth fur was said to be illegal to export, suggesting that poaching these creatures was an issue. In Skyrim, we can even witness bandits attacking a giant site in person. Seeing the giant mourning the loss of his mammoth as it lays dead in a small hot spring northeast of Mistwatch, it's hard not to feel sorry for them. But giants understandably receive mixed reviews. Sometimes seeing certain giants as a threat to be removed is fair, even if many times distaste towards them is ignorant. Alternatively, some individuals are very fascinated by them and hold them in the highest regard. O mighty Tundra Strider, how you and your mighty tusked beast silhouette against the great orange expanse. Thundering footsteps herald your herd, man and beast blazing trail together, one in nature, each relying upon the other, more than just man and beast, but equals who need one another to survive. How I long to run across the tundra in their mighty wake. That would truly be my greatest honor. In the evening we could sit around the campfire, and I would regale those nearby with songs of their majesty and grace. They would let me sample some of the mammoth's cheese, a food so foul yet with healing properties so great. We'd snack on the roasted skeever we'd freshly caught that day before, lying under the stars to sleep. What a grand time we would have. I am, of course, not the author of this poem. Their name is lost to time, and I omitted some lines due to just how excessively their praise ran on. But they are not the only person in Skyrim's history to be enamored with giants. Nords getting involved with giants' feet and armpits is just the beginning. In rare situations, some courageous souls, potentially that poet in secret, are so fond of giants that they truly aim to engage in highly sensual activities with them. Suddenly longing for a lusty Argonian maid doesn't seem so wild. I mean, it's well established that giants can send you a league away with one massive slam of their club, and yet throughout history, brave mortals have risked it all to get frisky with those far larger than themselves. But first, let's establish what we can about their origins so we can make the most sense of the juicier lore. Firstly, yes, giants have pointed ears, but so do other creatures unrelated to elves. Most evidence points towards giants being related to men, and some Nords believe they are from Atmoran specifically. That Kyne's Challenge tie-in book we mentioned, written by the guildmaster of the Fighters Guild of Sentinel, covers a group of warriors traveling around Tamriel to slay beasts and test their capabilities. On giants, it reads, "We live in an uneasy truce with the giants of Skyrim. Some believe that they are our Atmoran ancestors, and the more backward villages on the border with Hrothgar still breed cows specifically to paint with runes as offerings to these lumbering nomads. But the days of such superstition have passed in our circle. They are now seen by more forward-thinking Nords as a nuisance to tolerate." This viewpoint sounds quite literal, in the sense that the giants literally are the Atmorans that the Nords are descended from. Cord's discourse on giants actually states that there is an obvious connection between the Nords and the giants, though most Nords refuse to acknowledge it. Cord writes that the Atmorans were huge and smart. Nords descended from these ancient folk became the small, relatively speaking, intelligent people that we are today. Giants, on the other hand, became the huge, stupid creatures that we watch from a distance. Cord also believes that the Nordic view of treating giants as a nuisance and stealing their grazing lands, even hunting their mammoths for sport, will be the Nords' undoing. He says to disrespect the giants is to disrespect ourselves. If we can't learn to live with our huge cousins, I fear that conflict could become all-out war, and that would be a shame. Giants and Nords continue to vie for some of the same territories. Future conflict is inevitable unless we take steps to find peaceful solutions. Giants fall and Nords die, but I have never seen a giant eat a Nord. Interestingly, the improved Emperor's Guide to Tamriel, Skyrim, also states that giants feast on many types of meat, except human flesh. Giants may have their own reasons for this. Perhaps they taste worse than Skiva. However, it's also possible that the giants understand the link between themselves and the Nords and refuse to eat their distant relatives. Cord the Curious also mentions that Nords once honored their cousins with offerings of cows, but notes that the practice has fallen out of favor, perhaps to the detriment of Nord villages everywhere. Do consider that the Kyne's Challenge book was released with the Elder Scrolls Online, and that Cord's discourse is found in the online game, so we're talking about the Second Era here, around 1,000 years before the events of Skyrim take place. However, in Skyrim, we see the painted cow tradition is still being followed. There's a random encounter where you can see a giant leading a painted cow to their camp. However, there's an even cooler random encounter where you can find a farmer on his way to offer a cow to giants. Let's ask about it.
The cow, of course. Others do it differently, but I found that an annual offering usually keeps the giants away from our livestock.
And the paint on the cow?
It's tradition. We mark the animal as a way to let the giants know we're giving it to them willingly, sort of a peace offering.
If his cow somehow dies, the farmer will panic, saying that his wife's going to kill him when she finds out he'll need to bring another cow. Clearly, the whole family is in agreement with the act. It appears that even in the Fourth Era, some still do their best to make peace with the giants. There's also the case of an official warning note found at Steamcrag Camp, south of Windhelm, which reads, Attention citizenry, the giant here has been given leave to keep his camp. Please do not attempt to make trade, disrupt the mammoths, gawk at or otherwise disturb the giant. Resting here is not advised. This further cements the idea that some in Skyrim, even officials, show respect for the giants, though of course there are still many, like Jarl Skald of Dawnstar, who happily eradicate them.
Giants are a common problem in the Pale. The Empire always demanded I leave them be, but the Empire isn't here now. Go and slay one of the beasts. Should let them know the Dawnstar is not to be trifled with.
Once you return, he specifically says that you've shown those monsters that they will no longer be tolerated in the Pale. It's worth noting that Eastmarch, where Steamcrag Camp is not in Empire territory, and therefore some other official in that hold, perhaps even Ulfric if he understands the giants' complexities, actually has sympathy for them, or simply thinks leaving them alone is most wise, given the damage they can dish out. There was even meant to be a Civil War quest that saw you allied with the giants after offering one a painted cow and making a deal to have him attack your opposition in exchange for their herd of cows. There was even quest dialogue saying, "Alright, got her all painted up like in the old days. You know, when we'd paint things the giants were allowed. There were more of them back then." It's a shame the quest was cut. The giant, Goldar, would even speak some Tamrielic, a rare sight but possible in certain cases. While the painted cow situations give us unique insight into both the giants' culture and their relationship with the Nords, I also draw attention to it because it links back to providing a little extra legitimacy to the Atmoran connection we've been exploring. You see, Michael Kirkbride, who wrote a lot of the sensational lore for Bethesda decades ago, especially known for his work on Morrowind, actually concocted this whole painted cow idea in an unofficial text called The Seven Fights of the Aldu Daga. It's a long story beyond the scope of this video, but in Fight 6, it talks of the Nords learning to paint swirls on things to ensure that the giants, said to love such swirls, would simply take that stuff and nothing else, without any fighting occurring. It says the giants speak only one language, which in Daggerfall we have learnt of as Giantish, and that it's in the Nord's best interest to talk straight with the giants and paint all the swirls the same. Despite not being a canon text, clearly the painted cows idea did get pulled from it and inserted into Skyrim. Such has been the fate of many of Kirkbride's originally unofficial ideas making it into the game. Well, this same text mentions that the giants are in fact the true ancestors of the Nords, that they did come from Atmora, though at some stage lived alongside the Nords. It says that the Nords drove their giant kin up into the mountaintops, and that years later when the giants returned, they came down from the mountains and were different. They would not speak to the Nords anymore, they would only smile in their lazy way, stomp over, and take their stuff. It's a cool theory of how the giants lost their intellect, and reminds me a little of how minotaurs are theorized to have been dumbed down after being driven out of civilized society. The Kirkbride text also mentions that the Nords were once as big as giants, and if you're wondering just how big giants can get, one of Kirkbride's drawings, Talos Farewells the King of Atmora, late Second Era, depicts a truly gargantuan being. You may not think much of that when it comes to canon lore, however, the idea of giants once being supersized gained a lot of credibility with the release of the Elder Scrolls Legend card Ancient Giant, which shows a giant as tall as a mountainside. I'd also say that the face of this ancient giant seems to possess the intelligence of a regular Nord, and not the giants we meet in Skyrim, whose intellect may have dwindled over time. A letter to Thane Ogvar in the Elder Scrolls Online actually reads, "I've heard tales of ancient giants and Atmoran titans and such, but I thought they were just children's stories." Contextually, the author has been asking around about sea giant encounters, and not in a scholarly sense at all, though the idea of a potential separate being called Atmoran Titans, which could just be a designation for the extra large giants, is definitely interesting. While the designs won't be a perfect match, the ancient Nords do appear to have shared the giants' fondness for swirl patterns. They actually feature throughout many of the ruins. They're on doors, on ceilings, podiums, and even wrapped all around dragon word walls. It sure makes you think. Ultimately, many sources, both in-game and out-of-game, have pointed towards Nords sharing some sort of ancestry with giants from Atmora. In fact, I would argue that this shared ancestry idea is supported even further by what you've all been waiting for: breeding with giants. While the name half-giant evokes the thought of a being with a true 50-50 genetic split, sometimes the term has been used to refer to anyone with giant DNA, like Lyris Titanborn. We do encounter half-giants in the Elder Scrolls Online related to sea giants, and they are far taller than men, though we'll have to explore those unique giants another day. Nords being able to breed with giants may indicate some sort of DNA connection. While it may be possible, we don't encounter other races, like elves, with giant DNA. I should say that female giants do actually exist. You may have heard tales of Ysgramor's mighty bow, Long Launcher, restrung with the laments of the giant wives. It would sigh when it was born, and moan when it was shot. In the Elder Scrolls Online, a female giant is referred to as a giantess. There's actually an item you can find in the online game under the Wardrobe Accessories Tools category called Amorous Giantess Royal Ensemble. The description reads, "Set of bedroom stilts and large furry mittens for enacting the erotic charade The King and the Amorous Giantess." While we cannot watch the performance ourselves, the fact that it exists lets us know that the idea of having such relations with giants is a known matter, even if rare. You won't only hear about giantesses in the Elder Scrolls Online, you can actually encounter them, such as one called Matriarch Runa as a boss in the otherworldly Maelstrom Arena, and another in Scalecaller Peak, named Matriarch Aldous. This giantess is actually infected by a plague and much more powerful. Their name, Matriarch, does seem to denote a high level of respect in the giant culture, though we should also remember that chieftains exist. Matriarchs are of similar height to other giants in the online game, but with far more heft. And if you're choosing who would be able to even birth a true half-giant, one of these matriarchs, one amorously inclined, or a Nord, then I would have to assume it's a giantess. Surely they must be the origin point for bringing half-giants into Nirn. In fact, Lyris Titanborn's mother died giving birth to her considerably large daughter. While many assume that her father is just a giant, we actually see Lyris's father, Gilder, in spectral form in the Daughter of Giants quest. He looks far more Nord than giant, though his face does seem to possess more of a giant-like quality than Lyris's does. Lyris is understandably very tall, taller than her father's spirit, though he is also quite large. He explains, "The blood of giants flows through my veins. Your mother was a Nord. I gave her my seed without thought for her safety. That's why she died. Not because of you, child, because of me." Based on this tragic event still happening, despite Lyris's father looking far from one of Skyrim's giants, I would have to imagine that a Nord woman would not be able to get anywhere close to birthing a true half-giant, and that perhaps for many generations until they became smaller, the mothers would have basically all been giantesses. A depiction of the giant or half-giant Sinmer might support such an idea. The Elder Scrolls Online, for reasons hard to confirm, seems to portray his spirit as a regular giant. Look, it could be pure laziness on ZeniMax's part. However, if intentional, perhaps this is because back in the ancient Merethic era, true giants were much larger, and Sinma, while looking like a normal giant to more modern eyes, was actually already smaller due to carrying some Nord DNA. Alternatively, it could be that some sources, like the Songs of the Return Volume 27, are simply wrong. In this volume, Sinma is called a half-giant. He is the chieftain of the giants that Ysgramor and his remaining companions ultimately end up conquering. It reads, "Stalwart Valder and sly Hakra, long may their spirits be honored, fell assaulting the wily half-giant." The description wily also credits Sinma as being cunning, perhaps a trait that may have made him a more effective leader among his pure giant allies. Consider also that the text refers to him as the giant kin, and not just the giant. Ysgramor strode forward, halting his followers with a gesture. With another, he dared Sinma to face him in mortal combat. The giant kin proved willing, roaring his defiance and leaping to battle. A song of death and delight keened from Wuthrad as Ysgramor buried it deep in the giant kin's skull. Nord researcher Skaldspari will also tell you, only one, the dread half-giant Sinma, leader of Skyrim's giant clans, dared to face Wuthrad and Ysgramor. However, in addition to Sinma's spectral form, the spirit of the companion he defeated, Valder, only refers to Sinma as a giant, so it's hard to know the truth. Maybe referring to him as a half-giant each time is just excessively precise, especially for a Nord warrior. Regardless of Sinma and his spiritual depiction, I think we can all agree that there's still enough evidence with Lyris to show a long dilution process can play out, similar to the Bretons who originally started being formed when Durrani elves mixed with local needs, though gradually became more man than mer over time. At the end of the day, what we know for sure is that Nords can and have bred with giants, and likely share some element of ancestry. Hagravens, on the other hand, while appearing as a grotesque bird-woman fusion, do not appear to be the result of Nords having a fondness for flying creatures. Although some say the Dragonborn had too much to drink one night and tried to marry one of these feathered crones. But no matter what you promised such a terrifying monster on a night to remember, one should not even consider kissing the bride. Their foul smell and nauseating appearance would be the least of your concerns. Few creatures match the cunning depravity and repulsiveness of the Hagravens, a terrible conjoining of woman and bird. They will take through savagery what they cannot win through guile. But unlike some creatures that, while a nuisance or danger, cannot help but act according to their nature, these Hagravens were once women. They willingly surrendered their humanity to become creatures of corruption and decay. This trade grants them access to powerful magics, and as the Herbalist's Guide to Skyrim explains, the transformations they undergo infuse their entire beings with some element of that power. And even if you find they're not rending flesh from bone or singeing your skin with fireballs, Hagravens have been said to consume people, preferably while they're alive. It is written that the remnants of their meals may induce the greatest horror. However, you may be shocked to find such remains walking on 2 feet. The text warning us of this, aptly titled A Diet of Eyes, states that Hagravens are especially fond of eyeballs, and that even a sated Hagraven will sometimes merely suck out a victim's eyes, then cast out the unfortunate to wander sightless through the wilds. Not exactly wife material. Such eyeballless victims do feature in the Elder Scrolls Online, and Hagravens can even treasure their own eyes. Some will even remove their own eyeballs and store them for use in rituals. They truly will do whatever it takes to grow their power. The item description for such eyes reads, "In the hands of a proper Reach Witch, this grotesque ingredient is rumored to fuel rituals that call on ancient spirits. In-game, we see it used to call upon Hircine for a blessing." Gathered Hagraven claws are also useful, at least to some alchemists, though also, I imagine, to some drinkers. An item description of a modified Hagraven claw in the online game reads, "Though small, this hollowed-out Hagraven claw drinking vessel is said to increase the effects of whatever alcohol it contains." Their feathers have also been used to make quills, one of which was said to be enchanted for a storyteller so that her stories would never be forgotten. Believe it or not, but Hagravens have been known to take husbands outside of the last Dragonborn. While we do not know much about them, Hag-Husbands are a thing. And while I've seen speculation that they may be male Hagraven creatures, I do believe it is merely a title given to a mortal husband. While we know of a legendary skald known as Moracellus Hag-Husband, a clearer example is found in A Life Barbaric and Brutal, which tells the account of a Breton abducted by Reachmen. Taken hands-bound into the mountains, she lived as a captive for 8 years among the cruelty and child-heart sacrifices of a clan ruled by a Hagraven named Clovedra, a witch shaman of considerable power and priestess of Namira. The author explains, Clovedra's hag-husband was a crude and vicious man named Kuantark. He was a grave singer, a witchman shaman who could command the dead. In our land, we'd call him a necromancer. He was always looking sidewise at Vonk and licking his lips, as at a savory roast fowl. Vonk, by the way, is a skull-faced reach woman and horse breeder who abducted the Breton in the first place. It sounds to me like Kuantark is a mortal man himself, and more attracted to the mortal reach woman, Vonk, than the Hagraven he's married to. The text claims that he would provoke Vonk, who would threaten to complain to his hag-wife, which always sent him packing. The Hagraven and her husband even had a loutish son together, who is not noted to be any sort of hybrid being. Perhaps he was birthed when the Hagraven was actually mortal, and only later did she become a twisted monster. Maybe Vonk reminds the hag-husband of his wife's former, more palatable form, and that his marriage to the Hagraven now serves purely cultural and political purposes. Perhaps such a setup is a strong tradition of this tribe, who are actually called the Crowwife clan. While Hagravens are best known for their association with Reachmen Briarhearts, and we'll discuss that shortly, it's worth pointing out that the witches we sometimes find fighting alongside them are referred to by Skyrim's Prima Game Guide as sorceresses training to become Hagravens, often serving under them. The methods by which they turn to Hagravens, and even the dark magics used in many of their rituals, are still not well understood. In Skyrim's Repentance quest, we learn of a witch, Elia, who can no longer handle such a life and wants to kill her own mother before she can use a human sacrifice, an innocent life no less, in a ritual to become a Hagraven. Playing along as this sacrifice, you sit in a chair in front of her mother, with 2 wooden posts on either side of you, both with torches yet to be lit. A large antlered amalgamation of bones overlooks the ritual area from behind the chair, and in front of you a large bowl carries the severed head of a skeever. Apart from these motifs, likely allusions to Daedric princes, especially her scene in regard to the bones, and perhaps Namira in the case of the skeever head, we do not get the chance to see the ritual performed. Where factions like the Arcane University have clustered forms of magic and spellcasting into categories and schools, making them easier to learn and teach, the Hagravens of the Reach prefer magical practices far more ancient and secretive. One cannot simply visit their local library and read up on how to become a Hagraven. Thus, it is of no surprise that ambitious witches are forced to go directly to the source, to serve and live among such horrific sights in order to become a Hagraven themselves. Like many mysterious rituals opaque to the civilized wizard's curious eyes, Hagravens have existed since ancient times. The author of Kyne's challenge does say Hagravens are a creature they'd been hoping to face since the Reachmen captured one of the monsters that rampaged through Skyrim during the Wild Hunt back in the First Era, year 369. Whether they mean an actual Hagraven is spawned from the Wild Hunt, or that hearing of some shape-shifting elf-turned bird inspired their desire to encounter a Hagraven, I can't say for sure. I may take their first-hand experience hunting creatures as reliable, but if the author is suggesting that Hagravens are a creature of the wild hunt, I would have to disagree, though I would simply attribute such a belief to hearsay, not to deception. While we still don't know the specifics of how Hagravens are created, there is enough evidence of mortal witches becoming them to say that it's not a wild hunt process. That said, it is true that they have existed for thousands of years, as has their relation to the Reach folk and the creation of Briarhearts. The infamous legend of Red Eagle, named Feline in the tongue of the Reach, tells of the birth of this Reach child back in the First Era, and his prophesized rise to power. Feline grew in years and strength, and it seemed the prophecy would be fulfilled. The banner of Red Eagle was raised along the cliffs of the Reach, and his people prospered. Despite his best efforts to unite his people against the invading legions of Empress Hestra, he was cast out by his own kind, fearful of an empire that Red Eagle would not bend to. With gathered loyalists, he forged a new nation, bringing death to traitors and occupiers alike by night, vanishing by morn. But for every Imperial patrol and garrison they wiped out, yet more seemed to march from the Green South to replace them. One night, as Red Eagle and his men warmed themselves over damp fires of smoldering moss, a huddled, shambling figure came to them, cloaked in rags, face cowled. Though his men mocked and cast stones at the stranger, Feline sensed something and beckoned. The cow was thrown back in the dim light, and she revealed herself to be one of the ancient and venerable Hagravens. She offered power for a price, and a pact was made. Thus was brokered to the witch his heart, his will, his humanity. From that day forth, his was a spirit of vengeance, pitiless and beyond remorse. Red Eagle's forces grew in strength and numbers, and none could stand against them. Felin's eyes burnt coldly in those days, black opals reflecting a mind not entirely his own. 2 years passed, and the foreigners were all but driven from the Reach. Ultimately, Hestra would return to lay siege to Red Eagle's stronghold, though it is said 1,000 foreigners fell before his flaming sword, before he was finally slain. In his final moments, he presented his sword to his people, and swore an oath to return and lead them again once the Reach is free at last, and his blade returned. It's definitely one of my favorite legends presented in Skyrim, and it gives us a lot of insight into just how long the Hagravens have been helping the Reachmen and turning those chosen worthy into Briarhearts. While dead warriors can be made Briarhearts, the act of becoming one while alive is considered a great honor, and of course extremely painful. The Briarheart rituals performed vary by Reachman clan, and for more on these clans, I highly recommend you check out our recent deep dive on the Forsworn and Reachmen, linked in the description. Let's just say that in the end, such rituals tend to be observed and not fully understood. That said, all share the implantation of the seed of a Briarheart tree into the chest cavity where their fleshy heart once sat beating. Some who have fought the Briarhearts claim the implanted heart has a beat of its own. This stitching job is far from tidy, and the result is a being not undead but beyond life.
Heart of thorn, bones of the wild, in life forsworn, rise from death, blood of our blood.
Of course, we should not even for a second entertain the idea that Hagravens are being charitable, good Samaritans merely taking pity upon troubled Reachmen. They are self-serving beings after all, and you have to wonder, what's in it for them? Well, one could assume that gaining the protection of entire Reachman clans is not without its perks. For errors, certain arcane practitioners have sought to grow their power and influence by raising armies, be it the Cameron usurper and the Undead and Daedric armies he used to bolster his forces as he tore a warpath through Western Tamriel in the Third Era, or even the dragon, Durnavir, who longed to raise legions of the Undead, though he was deceived by the terms of the deal he made with the ideal masters of the Soul Cairn. Hagravens successfully integrating themselves into Reachman culture for thousands of years, becoming revered leaders of great use, has granted them not only the protection, but the weaponization of a highly galvanized group, maintained without much difficulty, and the ability to turn powerful but mortal warriors into super soldiers when required. It's clearly a well-struck bargain. There's a Vaetishran, a Reachfolk class of history keepers and storytellers, named Tosmon, thought to have existed back in the First Era, who presents an additional benefit. In part of his translated works on the death of Feline, he mentions that the Hagraven comes back at Red Eagle's burial to claim her due. She takes the Staff of Yew and brings it down upon Phaline's breast. The ichor within bursts forth, a black blood, and she takes the fruit of her desire seeded in Phaline's chest. Not only did Feline give his will, humanity, and original heart, but seemingly also his new one in death. Perhaps events during his time as a Briarheart strengthened the fruit placed within him, filling it like a vessel. Maybe it has something to do with the souls of the many foes he'd slain. Hagravens could harvest and use the hearts of other fallen Briarhearts. The Agents and Reagents book actually claims that Briarhearts pulled out of the corpse while it is still warm can be expensive purchases, though I imagine Red Eagle's one was especially powerful. Being able to pursue the dark arts among a culture fond of the Daedra is also of benefit to power-hungry witches turned even more powerful monstrosities. Reachman clans can worship many Daedric princes, viewing them not only as powerful spirits able to be bargained with, but entities that teach important lessons relating to the harsh primal conditions they live in. Some Reachmen, like the Boldclaw clan, worship Namira and spill blood while dancing in reverence. Others may even worship deities like Mehrunes Dagon, for example, relating to the Lord of Destruction for his sphere of ambition as they continually strive to improve their circumstances. In Skyrim, we even find one Hagraven, Drascua, in possession of one of the pieces of Mehrunes' razor, and while she has it due to being the descendant of one of the original keepers, I cannot imagine that, as a witch turned Hagraven, she's still keeping it for the same reasons. Most prominent among Daedra worshipped in the Reach is Hircine, and most evidence implies he has the most to do with the Hagraven's form. Who can forget the Glenmoral Witches of the Companion storyline, who actually featured in Daggerfall in their mortal forms? Hircine could be summoned at their coven. In the Elder Scrolls Online, the Glenmoral Weird were also found to be worshipping Hircine. Those we meet as Hagravens when Skyrim takes place were able to bestow the companions who first turned away from the true ways of Ysgramor with lycanthropy, a blessing firmly within the domain of Hircine. In Skyrim's Dragonborn DLC, there's also the 3 Hagravens found on Solstheim within the Altar of Thrond Cave. These witches also featured in their mortal forms back in Morrowind's Blood Moon DLC and could help the player to cure their lycanthropy. These witches all having ties to Hircine, a Daedric prince able to grant shape-shifting abilities, indicates he is likely the source of power Hagravens call upon to undergo their transformation. Additionally, we saw motifs typical of Hircine worship around the ritual area we talked about for Skyrim's Repentance quest, and there's the aforementioned Hagraven Eye used to bring about his blessing in the Elder Scrolls Online. Some Hagravens in the online game even turn mortals into various types of birds, again showing a relation to conferring a kind of beast form onto a mortal. Though less impressive than a were-creature, such activity also aligns with the Daedric Prince of the Hunt. We know that Hagravens create Briarhearts, and curiously, the improved Emperor's Guide to Tamriel even states that communion with Hircine is what allows them to have their own hearts cut from their chests, and a ligament of poisoned briars sewn in their place. Clearly, there's plenty of evidence suggesting Hircine's involvement with Hagravens. The Glenmoral Hagravens in Skyrim may not currently live within Reachman's society, however it's possible that some of their ancestors did in ancient times. The Nedic ancestors of the Druids and Weird Covens of High Rock, close enough to the Reach, could have been among the first Hagravens who achieved their form through communion with the Daedra and approached the Reachmen, similar to the one in the legend of Red Eagle. It's worth emphasizing that in the legend, the Hagraven is already referred to as ancient and venerable, suggesting they'd already been around and had an established high level of respect within the Reach. While Hircine is generally chief among Reachman deities, Hagravens of course may serve other Daedric princes, as such deities are not mutually exclusive. One must understand that as once ambitious mortals, Hagravens act more like individuals with their own personalities and agendas. Just like Reachmen can have clan rivalries, some even capturing others to have their Hagravens forcibly create new Briarhearts, Hagravens too may make enemies of their own kind. In Skyrim, one Hagraven, named Melka, can be found locked up in a cage inside Blind Cliff Bastion. You can help her seek revenge on Petra, a rival Hagraven who has stolen her tower and imprisoned her. She'll ask you if you like her tower, and in the end, she gifts you her staff and asks that you kill pretty things with it. There is also Moira, who jealously claims you must want the ring you proposed to her with back for that hussy Esmeralda with the dark feathers. Such feathers are often associated with crows and with Nocturnal, another Daedric prince that some Reachmen and Hagravens serve. The vicious Shadefeather clan, known to ambush travelers and murder them in dark rituals, even have a shrine to Nocturnal called the Shadefeather Ritual Stone. The Crow-Eye clan gives Nocturnal offerings, asking that she send her crows to guard them. A Hagraven in the online game even speaks to you through a crow. Nocturnal might have something to do with Hagraven's origins, though like the Mistress of Shadows herself, such connections are shrouded in mystery. There is a being called the Crowmother, a Daedra lord who calls herself the nether niece of Nocturnal and exists in the form of a Hagraven. She rules over Nocturnal's pocket realm of Evergloam named Crowswood, and created the sentient crows of this realm, the Blackfeather Court, from her feathers. While Daedra can manifest in a variety of ways, the Crowmother possesses more than a Hagraven aesthetic. She also craves the company of a committed man, and is willing to take drastic measures to enforce his devotion. She made a pact, another Hagraven move, with a Dark Elf mage, to teach him the secrets of forgotten magic, and in exchange, when the time came, he was to return to keep her company. It was their bargain sealed in blood and arcane runes. This mage, of course, tried to shirk his duty. The Crowmother says that when he left, it hurt her deeply. She felt used, though ultimately forgave him and just wants him to stop fighting and stay with her. Whether you think it's a funny or sad predicament, it's certainly got a Hagraven feel to it. Dark purple-eyed figures known as Gloamcrones also exist in Evergloam and take on the form of shadowy Hagravens. Additionally, Hagravens in the online game can attack with a storm of flaming crows. The translated works of Veta Shrintosmorn we mentioned previously also say that when the Hagraven returned and took Phelan's Briarheart, 100 hands draw flint, knock arrows. All lose heart, the hag's laugh festers at the soul, as death surrounds her. 1,000 crows take flight beneath her cowl, and she is gone. A Hagraven vanishing into a murder of crows definitely brings Nocturnal and her crow-filled entrance in Skyrim's Thieves Guild storyline to mind. While one could argue that being able to shift into a flock of birds is a power Hircine could grant, there's no denying that there are some connections between Hagravens and Nocturnal. Perhaps both Hircine and Nocturnal are called upon in the Hagraven forming ritual, or Nocturnal simply appreciates anything related to crows. In some instances, Hagravens like the Wispmother have been seen to tend to harpies, another feminine bird-like creature who some believe were once Daedra worshippers given their form by Nocturnal. These creatures are said to kidnap human men, mate with them, then destroy them. However, regardless of any potentially similar origins or behaviors, harpies are known to hatch from eggs, making them distinct creatures. Some final clues regarding Hagravens actually relate to events involving Kyne. Yes, god of the Nords, the mother of men and beasts, as Froki says. Symbolically depicted as a bird, called Sisterhawk by the ancient Feldir atop the throat of the world, Kyne is female and feathered. However, of course, this is not enough to associate her with Hagravens. What is intriguing though is that in the Elder Scrolls Online, the Keepers of the Grove, essentially a holy order dedicated to Kyne who tend to the Shrine of Kyne's Grove, actually end up bewitched, with their leader becoming a Hagraven. The Keepers had grown bitter with the continual loss of their family members in King Yoren's war. The final journal entry of Keeper Ormi, their leader, says, "Kyne is a lie. She does nothing. Our prayers fall on deaf ears. We have found another to embrace us, one who feels our pain and knows the hardships of war. I would never have given myself to a Daedric prince before, but desperate times call for desperate measures. She knows the pain we feel. We are no longer the Keepers. We embrace a new power. We will take Kyne's children as she has taken ours. May the false goddess weep tears of blood." This leader then becomes a Hagraven, further confirming Daedric involvement in the process, though this Daedric prince is referred to as she and as one who knows the hardships of war. Hircine, of course, and Nocturnal don't really fit the bill here. It could be Namira, who would have seen her fair share of blood and violence, especially in battles fought by Reachmen, and would enjoy the corruption of such pious, divine-worshipping people. She may have taught Keeper Ormi the secrets involved in such a transformation, acting more as a ritual guide than the sole creator of the Hagraven form. We could glance briefly at Boethia, as this situation is quite a betrayal, and she is the Daedric Prince of Betrayal and is far more involved in war and with warriors in general, though there doesn't appear to be any strong connections between this Prince of Treason and Hagravens. Ormi's son, thought dead, is actually alive, and prays to Kyne to forgive his mother and not to take her from him, as he's already lost his brother and father. He promises to return to the war and fight for Kyne's honor. And then Kyne, very forgivingly, is able to overpower this Daedric influence and restore Ormi to her human form. Ormi actually says that the soldiers, thought to be killed by her and her accomplices, still live. Apparently they were to become members of their Daedric coven. She says the other keepers are still under the spell of Daedric influence and that she'll work on freeing them. It is all very curious and of course very Daedric. Other creatures in Skyrim come covered in fur with purely animalistic desires and hunt their prey on 4 legs. Skyrim's saber cats seldom prove an issue for a dragonborn, though I do have some memories of being mauled by them at earlier levels. They can pounce forward with great speed, able to tear up foes with their razor-sharp front claws or impale them with their iconic saber teeth. These cats are rather stealthy, and many players feel that they seem to just come out of nowhere, proving a challenge to escape from. The brief treatise Cats of Skyrim puts forward that the snowy version of the saber cat with its white spotted fur is the true stealth master here, actually using it more for stalking than its cousin, the average saber cat in the plains. This standard variant, while benefiting from its reddish-brown fur when it blends into certain grassy regions, doesn't try to camouflage as intentionally and is seen skulking and sometimes sleeping on rocks. The most interesting fur markings, glowing purple no less, belong to the Vale saber cats. Some bards claim this glow is granted by Kyne, while others, particularly the College of Sapiarchs, refute this, though as particularly proud elves, perhaps they'd care little for crediting a Nordic god. Hunters are said to report that saber cat meat is tasteless and not fit to eat, which may explain why we cannot attempt such a culinary adventure in-game, though surely it cannot be as bad as the forbidden chorus pie, a recipe written by Nils of Candlehearth Hall. Saber cats are, instead, hunted for their pelts, which can be turned into leather and used to craft certain armor pieces, to furnish your Hearthfire home full taxidermy style if you'd like, or just to create the leather strips required to forge a few hundred iron daggers, a legitimate 2011 hustle before Bethesda patched this highly fast method of leveling smithing. Sabercat teeth and eyes are used in alchemy, the former able to help fortify smithing if you're missing just how easy it used to be. Sabercats can even be captured for use in arena battles for entertainment, though this is no ordinary nature documentary. What we really want to ponder is, are we technically, perhaps, skinning and eating Khajiit? Literally mashing their eyeballs and teeth to create elixirs we thoughtlessly imbibe mid-battle, or poisons, sending lab-made Khajiit juice straight into the veins of foolish foes. Well, as dubious as it may seem, the Tale of Drozira, a text found in Skyrim and in the Elder Scrolls Online, implies this is the case, or at least that the Sabercats, while no longer Khajiit in a true sense, are descended from them. The text contains a transcription of a history lesson a Khajiit father gives to his cub in the grips of Moonsugar, so it's not necessarily Nirn's best source, though the storyteller states his own father passed this tale down to him. Also, to be fair, we should consider that Khajiit aren't as affected by Moonsugar as other races, and the father is still able to speak coherently and make requests of his cub. Look, it just gives me more tipsy vibes than full-on plastered blackout territory. The author, Sonia Vett, overheard this tale while making camp with a Khajiiti caravan and decided to record it, saying, "For the Khajiit do not often speak of their history to outsiders." She believes that the father would not have freely spoken this tale at all if it were not for the Moonsugar. Sonia's transcription of the Drozira tale speaks of ancient Khajiit hearing the great roar of Alkosh and racing towards his voice. This Alkosh is the great cat king of time, essentially their version of Akatosh. In 3 days' time, these ancient Khajiit, claimed to be faster back then, had crossed the whole of Tamriel, resting not even for Moonsugar. Joining with the pride of Alkosh, these Khajiit were his strongest warriors. However, Lorkhaj, also known as Lorkhan or Shor to the Nords, was jealous of their devotion to Alkosh, and thus gave his roar to the Rawulfarth to spite the Khajiit. As you may guess, this is the Khajiiti version of Wulfarth or Izmir, Dragon of the North. The Khajiit tale claims that Rawulfarth used the roar Lorkhaj gave him to speak to the moons, Massa and Secunda, and actually move them to their fullness in the sky. This turned the Khajiiti warriors into Sench, those quadrupedal Khajiit you may have met in elsewhere in the online game. It's worth noting that this is the correct moon phase for Khajiit to manifest as Sench. After Rawulfarth's action, Lorkhaj then stripped these Sench of all reason. This turned them into Rojit, who over time grew smaller and lost their cunning altogether, which is why, according to the Khajiit father, you should not hesitate to strike them down when they approach the wagons. This part of the story is what makes one assume that these Rojit he encourages striking down are Skyrim Sabercats. If they really are the Rojit of ages past, then you could view them as Khajiit, in a sense, or at least as a descended form cursed by Lorkhaj. But the lines get blurry. We don't think of or treat the corrupted Falmer as being the same beings as the original Snow Elves, despite being descended from them. We do not treat Draga the same as the once mortal ancient Nords who worshipped the dragons. So while it may be a technical truth that these Sabercats are derived from the catfolk of elsewhere, we do not have to treat them as living, breathing Khajiit when we encounter them. The tale claims that Drozira is the only one of these Rojit who still remembered, and therefore answered the summons of Rawulfarth when he returned to sink his fangs into the Red Mountain. Wulfarth was said to ride Drozira up Red Mountain to strike at the heart of the Dunmer, pouncing atop Dumalakath, the dwarf orc, when he had his blade to the throat of the Ash King so that he could not speak. Lorkhaj was also said to have returned Drozira from the lands of Sheogorath for his bravery and for saving Wulfarth. It's certainly a captivating tale, and ends with the father asking his cub to fetch him some more moonsugar for their sweet cakes. The transcriber recognizes the boastful elements of the story, though does state certain facts seem to line up with what is believed to be the truth behind the legends. Also, while this story of a story doesn't say it's 100% set in the province of Skyrim, it does seem like it, given that the book first appeared in Skyrim, that it makes reference to saber-cat-like beings that approach their wagon, and with the father constantly referencing how Nord bards don't give Drozira credit, and that when you find a bard who speaks ill of the Khajiit, you be sure to leave him an iron claw in the back to remind him who saved Skyrim. The author, Sonia, also bothered to edit in a little note that Lorkhaj is shore to the Nords. Skepticism of this tale is certainly warranted, but the next time you come across a saber-cat in Skyrim, you may pause to reflect upon what its origins may really be. Curiously, the author of that Cats of Skyrim text that we mentioned earlier actually said that while seeking to study saber-cats, they encountered several Khajiit and that they have been most unhelpful. This expectation that Khajiit might be able to help with learning about saber-cats does seem to suggest that a connection between the catfolk and Skyrim's saber-cats is a known concept, at least among those interested in felines. It's worth noting that the Elder Scrolls Online, in its typical mount-hungry excitement, added saber-cat mounts to the game. More wild ones, too, are found around Skyrim and northern Tamriel in general. They possess a larger variety of fur designs, more similar to the various Khajiit fur stocks, I must say. Additionally, the saber-cat mount description states, the saber-cats of northern Tamriel are possibly even more powerful than their southern Sench cousins. They are certainly more feral and difficult to train. That didn't stop the Nords of Falkreath from breaking and training them to serve as mounts. The snow leopard saber-cat variety is claimed to have been domesticated by the shamans of the Skull tribe for use as mounts, though the mount description conveniently states that their breeding was restricted to keep them exclusive, and thus they are down to a dwindling few. I suppose that's why eras later, when Skyrim takes place, we will not witness this when visiting Solstheim. But now let's take a trip beneath Skyrim, for Blackreach is mesmerizing, and it would be a shame not to visit, and like anyone traveling through such dark and dangerous domains, we must of course follow the pretty blue lights, to the haunting, scantily clad figure of the Wispmother. The light of these ethereal spheres, known as wisps, inevitably catches the eyes of those who stay in Blackreach long enough. Wisps are quite literally as intriguing as they are deadly, intentionally luring adventurers close enough to their Wispmother to grant them a quick death. If you're curious enough to find yourself face to face with one of these ferocious, ghastly women, her wisps will have already begun their assault. Their spiky wisp's kiss attack drains your life force and sends it straight to their mother. Like many creatures in this video, there is great debate about what these wisps and their mothers really are. Two theories are presented in Skyrim in the book The Wispmother by Matthias Etienne. He writes of two scholars with differing views, Master Sadran Serethi, presumably a dark elf, who has done extensive research into necromancy and Cyrodiil's Ayleid culture, and Ledet Villain of the Synod. I do mostly agree with Serethi, though also believe their separate views are partially reconcilable. Ledet believes Skyrim's wisps are a subspecies of true wisps, and that they're scavengers that lure prey to the Wispmother and share in the psycho-ethereal energy released by her kills. They are then referred to as codependent, most likely lacking the formidable defenses of their predatory cousins, rendering them far more vulnerable. Serethi, on the other hand, believes the wisps are emanations or conjurations of the Wispmother and not free-living creatures. It is said that this is supported by an incident in which an adventurer killed a Wispmother only to observe the remaining wisps immediately perish as a result, though that specific source is said to be considered highly unreliable. However, we can confirm this is true ourselves in-game when we slay a Wispmother. The wisps do perish. Ledette's view may still contain some truth in the sense that the sustainment of wisps may be enhanced by energy released from the Wispmother's kills, and that if wisps are a kind of codependent scavenger, then they may have become intertwined enough that they die when the Wispmother ceases to exist. Then again, others would call that fully dependent, which makes Serethi's idea that they aren't free-living creatures seem more accurate. However, we still can't say whether wisps are actually related to what Ledette calls true wisps. This likely refers to will-o'-the-wisps, what Matthias calls a rare and dangerous swamp denizen of southern Tamriel. He says this is what most scholars would think of when it comes to wisps, though notes that Cyrodiilic legends refer to them as lone predators, which we can see as true in the Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion, but this is not the case with Skyrim's wisps and their symbiotic relationship. We should consider that there are other wisps in the Elder Scrolls Online that don't always need a Wispmother to live. There's even a non-Wispmother related one of similar shape called the Galen Wisp. Bright green, its description states, "Wisps are sent from Ifri to herald the storms of Rain's hand. To see one is to see the promise of a new growth, new life, and a new chapter in nature's cycle. Of course, if you see one in Skyrim, it's a promise of your death if you don't stay away." Admittedly, sometimes the Elder Scrolls Online comes up with somewhat questionable lore to justify adding a new player pet or mount, but it's certainly interesting to note that not all wisps are of Wispmother origin. Also consider that naming creatures in the Elder Scrolls universe may be done by scholars who, as you can see, often have conflicting opinions and can't always be correct. Perhaps any wisp-like entity, like will-o'-the-wisps, simply get grouped in together with the others, like those in Skyrim, as they're all seen as mysterious floating balls of energy. Interestingly, when Skyrim's wisps are slain, they actually leave behind a physical core. It's easy to miss. If you're trying to study these wisp cores, just make sure you find them before they roll down a hill. The Wispmother book states that popular legend holds that wisps are the spirits of the Wispmother's previous victims, and if true, then perhaps the cores are simply a shell that holds such spirits she has captured, or simply contain part of her life force that she has parted with to function as what Serethi calls emanations of the Wispmother. You can see why there's confusion. If they were merely emanations or even conjurations, as he also says, then I can't imagine that they drop physical wisp cores. However, these wisp cores can be salvaged to obtain the very same glow dust that Wispmothers drop, which hints that they are in fact infused with the same essence, leaning more towards the idea that the Wispmother put her own life force or some sort of energy similar to hers into these cores. If she is an undead spirit herself, then similar energy to her own could be captured from spirits of those she slays and then sealed into these cores. This is all very different to the idea of Skyrim's wisps being completely separate creatures that a Wispmother has simply acquired a mutually beneficial relationship with. Will-o'-the-wisps also drop glow dust, however it looks quite different and has different properties. I do find it intriguing that the popular legend of the wisps being the spirits of previous victims holds a little credibility by also stating that these spirits strengthen her. While you may think that this is just by draining your life force and sending it back to their mother, I have used console commands to confirm that killing all of a Wispmother's wisps completely wipes out her magicka reserves. This is probably why such a legend holds that anyone hoping to destroy her must first release the souls of those she has killed. It's demonstrably false, but clearly based on some truth, as it certainly helps. If the deadly frost magic Wispmothers love to use alongside their children isn't enough to take you out, they do possess another very unique ability, which is to create shades. These are functionally copies of the Wispmother, identical in appearance, though weaker, often able to be slain in a single strike if you're strong enough. They serve to distract you and wear you down with frost magic while your blade or fire searches for the real target. While it's easy to miss miss in the heat or cold of such a battle, wisps are actually destroyed when shades are created. Their core drops to the ground as the shades erupt out into the battle, seemingly from the power once held within the core. This also wipes out the Wispmother's magicka and is performed as a defense mechanism when a Wispmother's health drops to a point where it feels threatened. If she has assumed full control of and made separate wisp creatures fully dependent on her with magics unknown, then it could simply be a life-draining sacrifice she's able to exert upon them. But if they're the souls of previous victims, then she could simply be ripping them from the cores and harnessing their power in a different fashion. Serethi believes Wispmothers are beings existing in a necrologic state, a type of lichdom developed by a now forgotten First Era culture, and that these are no mere ghosts, they are a cult of powerful sorceresses who achieved eternal life through undeath. If they do possess similar knowledge to other successful liches, then the Wisp cores could be used as vessels to hold souls. Liches have been known to transfer their own souls into physical objects and also tear out the souls of victims in their apotheosis into immortal undead beings. Ladette, on the other hand, believes Wispmothers are not undead, but rather elemental manifestations arising out of Nirn itself. She notes several similarities to Spriggans and Ice Wraiths, and contends that Wispmothers are essentially elemental personifications of snow or mist, innately wielding the power of their element, instead of manipulating it through conventional sorcery. We'll talk about Ice Wraiths soon, and the crazy way they seem like they can replicate themselves, and if they're natural or undead. However, Wispmothers are provably undead, so I think Serethi undoubtedly wins this round. Let us not forget that the Synod, who Ladette is a part of, have banned research into necromancy and conjuration, and may have a limited understanding of anything relating to lichdom as a result. If you hit Wispmothers with a turn undead spell, the message on screen will say they are too powerful for turn undead, instead of saying they resisted it like it would say for Spriggans. In previous testing, this led me to boost the maximum level enemy the spell affects through a Fortify Restoration potion, which then let me turn the Wispmother with my magic, just like other undead like Draga or skeletons. Serethi, a scholar who has extensively researched necromancy, believing that these are powerful lich sorceresses existing in a necrologic state developed by a now forgotten First Era culture, definitely makes me think of the Snow Elves. Just look at them. Their ears also have that classic elvish shape like the corrupted Falmer, or even living snow elves like Gelabor. It would go well with ideas contained in the tales mentioned in the book, saying that Wispmothers take the form of humans, some say elven spirits, wreathed in mist and decaying rags. The author, Matthias, also mentions that some believe these beings are all that remains of the elves who once ruled Skyrim, and as you can probably tell, I tend to agree, though of course we know that the corrupted Falmer and Gelabor and his brother still exist. Weirdly enough, the Wispmother book claims most reputable scholars dismiss such Snow Elf stories, among others, but I simply can't agree, so I'll continue to make my case. By the way, Gelabor does mention that certain splinter groups of Snow Elves resisted the Dwemer's offer, so it's possible that some Snow Elf sorceresses actually made themselves into Wispmothers, fully aware it was their only way to survive the impending carnage. When they're not underground in Blackreach, which I assume is a cold place, Wispmothers are found haunting some of Skyrim's chilliest locations. It fits well with the idea of Snow Elves being able to live comfortably in icy caverns. For example, there's one at the entrance to South Skybound Watch, located in the snowy mountain area behind Riverwood. There's another at the unmarked location, Shrine of Arkay, Windhelm Hills. Another Wispmother is found in Winterhold Hold at the bottom of an iceberg crevasse. If you haven't done Dragon Rising, you can find one up in the snowy mountains southeast of Morthal and southwest of Dawnstar at Skyborn Altar. On the way there from Dawnstar, you may also find Frostmere Crypt, where you go to banish the Wispmother in the Pale Lady quest. In addition to being freezing locations, many of the spots Wispmothers can be found happen to be situated in areas where Ysgramor and his companions would have been slaughtering Snow Elves. This would support the notion that these undead feminine foes could actually be some sort of ghost-like beings, even if they achieved such a state intentionally. Ghosts tend to be created when a significant emotional betrayal or traumatic event makes a spirit unable to depart the mortal plane in death, and these Wispmothers are frequently found haunting places associated with the Snow Elves' demise, especially if some were those Snow Elves enslaved by the Dwemer. Not to mention these feminine foes can also pass through matter, they vanish upon defeat, and of course they are of similar color to ghosts. While we've been enjoying some of Skyrim's crispiest air, it was back down in Blackreach that we first introduced the Wispmother. This one is not the only one around the ancient ruins of the Dwemer, where the Falmer were originally enslaved and corrupted. So there's the Wispmother near the pumping station in Blackreach, another is found up a mountain in the Reach, an unmarked location called Dwarven Ruins, lair of the Wispmother, and another at the ruins of Rakund, also up in the mountains, this time in the Rift. Another unmarked location named Ruined Toll and Wispmother's Well isn't Dwemer, but it shows Bethesda clearly using Wispmothers in a location that is ghostly, drawing from the Japanese ghost story of the death of Okiku. It's got that Devil by the Well Witcher 3 vibe. The author of the Wispmother book also writes that some people believe they are ghostly women who take vengeance on those who wronged them in life, as well as ghosts waiting to be laid to rest. However, we can't say whether being brutally murdered by Nords or betrayed by the Dwemer is fully responsible for their state, or if they truly did manifest their undeath through effort. The Pale Lady quest mentioned earlier is also very ghostly, featuring a Wispmother who wants a sword returned to her and is relentlessly haunting the dreams of a Khajiit bandit to achieve this. Such a desire is rather personal, and not something a mere creature or manifestation of natural elements would care for. The book, Lost Legends, states that the tales of the Pale Lady say she is a ghostly woman who wanders the northern marshes, forever seeking her lost daughter. Some say she steals children who wander astray, others that her sobbing wail strikes dead all those who hear it. But behind these tales may lie a kernel of truth, for ancient records speak of Omriel, a mysterious figure Ysgramor's heirs battled for decades and finally sealed away. Presumably an elvish name, perhaps the Pale Lady really is this powerful Omriel figure. She may have existed as one of the sorceresses Serethi talked about, becoming a Wispmother in death. That is, assuming she ultimately died after being sealed away. Perhaps Skyrim's Wispmothers were all formed using a mutually known technique upon or close to finally being defeated by Nords or Dwemer. There are many possibilities, but all suggest complexity beyond personifying snow or mist. The Elder Scrolls Online doubled down on the ghostly aspect of Wispmothers in particular, often casting them as women who were wronged in life and now haunt the mortal plane. You can learn of some of their emotionally charged backstories, with a few having unique names, such as Saradin the Lost Love or the Lost Maiden. Some of these story-based ones even have dialogue, such as, "Don't you see what she has done? I will not let you free her," and "You've ruined our life together." A text you can find added in the Necrom chapter, titled Sentient Beasts of the Gallery, contains notes on the inmates of the Feral Gallery, a menagerie of beings in Hermaeus Morris' possession within Apocrypha. One such prisoner is a Wispmother, and this text states that she often calls her wisps her children, and claims to store wisps under the folds of her skirt. ZeniMax has basically thrown Wispmothers all over Tamriel, with a bunch of variants, arguably different to those we find in Skyrim, with their purely glacial tones and lack of speaking. The ones in the Elder Scrolls Online do not even appear to have the same pointed ears, they don't have the same focus on frost magic, they come in multiple color designs, and they look far more tangible, as if you could touch them, if you've got a death wish. Now this tangible nature is actually confirmed with the Amranal Wispmother, which we'll speak of soon. Despite many differences, it's still possible for Wispmothers in the online game to spawn clones of themselves, and of course manipulate wisps, raining them down on you to deal shock damage. They clearly have enough in common to justify their name. Perhaps they are different to Skyrim's, but due to also being a feminine spirit-like being able to control wisps, scholars simply didn't think it necessary to distinguish them with a separate name. Though it can feel like a bit of a poorly thought out retcon that showed little care for unique Skyrim folklore, Skyrim's Wispmother book says that most agree Skyrim's Wispmothers rarely appear in more temperate climes, and some people even claim they're native to Hjolmarch. Well, in the online game, Wispmothers can be encountered in provinces as far as Valenwood and Blackmarsh, but there is actually a tie found between Skyrim's Wispmother book and the Elder Scrolls Online. Within its pages, we find mention of a being known as the Amranal of Valenwood. The tale of it is referred to by the author as similar to that of Skyrim's Wispmother. However, after listing it among other mythical beings around Tamriel, he goes on to say that, unlike these mythic creatures, most scholars concede that Wispmothers actually exist. However, in the Elder Scrolls Online, you're sent to slay the Amranal Wispmother. In Geralt of Rivia fashion, you return with its severed head as a trophy, something not possible with the vanishing ethereal Wispmothers we find in Skyrim, who only leave some glow dust and wrappings. This indicates a significant difference. However, then there's a poem in the game about the Amranal of Valenwood called the Amranal Spell. The poet talks of a woman drifting towards them, in a dream no less. Walking through the forest, hoping to be tracked, caught, and killed, the poet continues, Wispmother, ethereal and strange, do not be a ghost to me. Snow Elf, do not be a legend. Release me from this restless enchantment, wrap me in your spell, and let the last word on my lips be your name, Amranal. So it seems Wispmothers, even in other provinces, can be assumed, at least in myth, to be Snow Elves. I definitely favor this theory for the ones found in Skyrim. A Wispmother model is used in the online game for the Omen of Blood. She is able to disguise herself in a mortal form, but is essentially a spirit serving Vaermina, Daedric Prince of Nightmares. It is peculiar that this being, and the Wispmother in the Pale Lady quest, and the Amranal in the poem share a connection to dreams. This Omen of Blood is also not the only Wispmother figure in the online game that can present with a different form. In the quest chain that includes A Stranger Uninvited, you can discover a High Elf who believes he's found his dead wife in Blackmarsh. Interestingly, there's also a warning notice about wisps in the area, urging travelers not to listen to them, indicating that their ability to lure travelers goes beyond a visual curiosity. Perhaps they carry the whispered seductions of their mother like a siren call. Anyway, the elf woman in spirit form that the High Elf believes to be his wife is in fact a Wispmother in disguise. You also find later that she's holding trapped souls captive, which fits with the idea we discussed earlier about Wispmothers potentially trapping souls and then making wisps out of them. These beings are truly far stranger than they appear on the surface, but finally it is time for some weird Ice Wraith lore. They are among my favorite creatures to encounter in Skyrim, not only for their unique appearance, but due to the mystery surrounding their nature. One of the scholars we recently discussed, Ledette, who posited that Wispmothers are elemental manifestations, was said to have backed up her assumption by noting similarities they share with Spriggans and Ice Wraiths. Perhaps in this case, she is correct about Ice Wraiths, that they do innately wield the power of their element. After all, Elder Scrolls Online features a near identical being named a Flame Wyrm, obviously wielding the power of a different element found around volcanic vents. It's also summoned by Dragon's Fire Breath in certain times in the Elder Scrolls Online, and yours in Skyrim if you've got the Dragonborn Flame power from the Epistolary Acumen Black Book, though the one in Skyrim does appear more distinguished in appearance, and in the Prima Game Guide these are listed as Daedra for what it's worth. However, other descriptions of ice wraiths in Skyrim, and definitely certain behaviors we see, again create this blurry line where undead forces, or perhaps simply spiritual energies, may be at work. In Herbane's Bestiary, ice wraiths, they are called ethereal apparitions, which sounds ghostly, but then also lucid serpentine creatures of magic, as if conjured from the frozen tundra and glaciers of Skyrim itself, which sounds more related to natural magics arising out of Nirn, though that text, while insightful in some ways, is far from a scholar's handbook, and reads more as a collection of embellished, though plausibly true, hunting stories. Time for some much needed investigation. Ice wraiths are found haunting the most freezing areas of Skyrim, and in the online game can even be encountered in other provinces, such as in the north of Cyrodiil or the Hrothgar region. No matter what you do in Skyrim, ice wraiths are not affected by turn undead magic. Case closed, right? Maybe they really do, just like the cold. Well, all the way back in the promotional documentary Behind the Wall, The Making of Skyrim, the topic of ice wraiths came up, a favorite creature of Todd's. Matt Carafano, the lead artist who worked on Skyrim, explained that there was a line in lore that Nords, when they come of age, will go fight an ice wraith, but they didn't really know what an ice wraith looked like. However, they decided that they didn't want to just design a typical ghost spectre kind of thing, so working with one of the concept artists, the very cool serpentine crystal and ice creature was created. While this doesn't confirm anything in-game, it does show us that ice wraiths were initially assumed to have some kind of ghost-like nature, and that the shape they gave it was to make such a being truly unique. However, its true origins weren't revealed. Entities called wraiths do exist as ghastly undead in the Elder Scrolls universe. I have many memories of battling them in the Elder Scrolls for Oblivion almost 20 years ago. Time flies, doesn't it? As we discussed with Wispmothers, ghosts and related beings can often be spirits with unfinished business, and it's possible ice wraiths have this in common. Let's throw away all the ice wraith locations where they can be switched out for other leveled creatures like snow bears. Just looking at their proper set locations, ice wraiths tend to hide near skeletons and places of cultural significance. In the Dawnguard DLC, we venture into the Forgotten Vale, a place where Snow Elves would embark upon a grueling but rewarding pilgrimage, seeking enlightenment and to become one with their chief deity, Auriel. Not all Snow Elves survived their journey, lugging around that giant ewer, filling it at each basin, and ultimately seeking an audience with the Archcurate. The book, Touching the Sky, states that many of the pilgrims struggled not only against the natural elements of the treacherous Vale, but with a myriad of tests upon their faith and loyalty. If they failed, their faith would forever be scrutinized, and they'd live out the rest of their days filled with shame and regret. It is said upon their arrival that many were mere shells of the person they had once been. Some were mad from sleeplessness and starved to the point of frailty. Those successful few who ultimately ascended the stairs of the temple had eerily similar final words. It is said that every pilgrim ascended bathed in light, a look of relief and contentment on their face. You can imagine those who failed would definitely have unfinished business, particularly if they died during what would be the most important undertaking of their lives. Well, one can actually discover some skeletons along the river in the Forgotten Vale. Ice wraiths are seen to lay in wait, precisely by these bones. In fact, they are so close to the bones that they may rattle them as they rise out of the snow to attack. This specific skeleton is found up a pathway into the cliffside, which isn't exactly front and center. And thus, if we were to speculate that the Ice Wraith is merely camping here to prey on opportunistic looters, they didn't pick a spot that would get much foot traffic. As you move towards the bones of what I can only assume is a fallen Snow Elf, the Ice Wraith rises out from beneath it. It won't even try to attack you if you walk by the entrance, only if you come right up to the bones. Another skeleton, also with a chest, is found close by in a far more visible open area. Here an Ice Wraith will also ambush you as you come towards the bones of the fallen and the belongings they once carried. With circumstances like those that create ghosts at play, perhaps the natural ice magics joined with part of the Snow Elf's grieving spirit, creating a kind of pseudo-undead being. This would combine both ideas, that Ice Wraiths are comprised of natural elements and some sort of spiritual energy that persists after a mortal's death. Other Ice Wraiths found in the coldest parts of Skyrim match up with areas where Ysgramor and his companions would have been brutally slaughtering Snow Elves eras ago. It's a similar concept to the Wispmother theory we explored, and having a scholar note similarities between them, to me at least, only strengthens the potential that they can both be complex beings and not 100% natural. While Ice Wraiths clearly take on more of a creature-like form than Wispmothers do, it doesn't mean that no lingering spark of spiritual essence was involved in their creation. After all, if they were a kind of Spriggan-like nature's guardian type of entity, it's fair to ask why they'd hide near skeletons, potentially guarding them, instead of just big slabs of ice. You get the idea. There is this wild piece of lore regarding their creation, or at least how these entities might continue to spread throughout Skyrim that can coexist with our aforementioned theories. So it may be in addition to the ghost-like method, or if they are purely natural phenomena, it could even be their chief strategy of procreation. We shouldn't forget as well that natural doesn't have to mean boring or without any nuance in the Elder Scrolls universe. While you might expect me to start talking about Ice Wraiths mating with each other, I'm actually talking about them entering a mortal, though perhaps not how you think, and this isn't even my choice of words, so prepare to imagine being temporarily inhabited by an Ice Wraith. Possessed, some might say. Such a situation is documented within that tie-in book, Kyne's Challenge, A Hunter's Companion. Journeying through Skyrim, the creature-hunting warriors are halted by a dramatic change of weather. Thick fog and snow blindness brought on by blizzards become yet another challenge to overcome, and after pushing through the fresh snowdrifts towards a shelter of overhanging rocks, one of the Nords, Fenrig, yells out. He falls backwards only to scramble to his feet to face off against a collection of ice bones bound together by nature magic, a sharp-ridged spine finishing at a malcontented jaw of bone and sharp teeth. The awoken Ice Wraith, described also as a snaking skeleton of blue flame, begins its assault, lashing out with those icy jaws we've all encountered while playing Skyrim. During the battle, its bite is able to be blocked by the steel and wood of Fenrig's shield. However, another of its attacks allows it to go straight through Fenrig, or in the words of the book, the Ice Wraith actually entered Fenrig. Typically, we would assume such piercing strikes from an Ice Wraith would completely impale the victim, killing them. Such is the fate of many who enter combat against these beasts in Skyrim. However, this time, such an assault was not something that killed this Nord, Fenrig. This makes the attack feel more ethereal in nature, though at the same time, these beasts are very physical, with teeth so sharp and unyielding that they can not only be collected, but in the Elder Scrolls Online, are said to have been used as fishing hooks that remain as sharp as ever. After a moment of entering Fenrig, the Ice Wraith reappears out his back, after which the expert swing of a fellow warrior's axe cuts it down. The next scene is where things truly get interesting. It reads, "Fearing his possession, all we could do was watch Fenrig, who began to shake and turn as pale as the snow around us. Suddenly, his eyes widened, mouth hung agape, and a second, smaller Ice Wraith spat itself from within, sailing out of Fenrig's throat and into my hammering strike, which shattered it into dozens of pieces. Fenrig dropped to a knee, gasping. Fenrig somehow survived, though received a Whitbane infection as a result. He left with his dogs, returning the next morning with his pestilence cured. Catching a disease from a ghost or spirit is rare, but has been seen before in Morrowind, so it doesn't technically rule out an undead or spiritual essence theory. In the Elder Scrolls V, we will not contract Whitbane from Ice Wraiths, though they also don't end up inhabiting our bodies in battle. Perhaps that's the way you actually get the disease. The Whitbane tale is not a one-off though. Ice Wraiths bestowing this illness is reinforced in Herbane's Bestiary too. So the Ice Wraith goes into Fenrig and leaves, but then in full alien facehugger style, we learn that a smaller Ice Wraith, seemingly spawned from within, exits from his gaping mouth. This is pretty disturbing and definitely makes Ice Wraiths far weirder than I ever thought when playing Skyrim. This could be how Ice Wraiths can replicate. If they truly do only require a small bit of spiritual essence, and it can be from a mortal perhaps, you could imagine the Ice Wraith goes inside a person and somehow reproduces off part of their soul. The person may still be able to survive. Think of how when entering the Soul Cairn as a non-vampire, Serana partially soul traps you and offers that to the ideal masters. Well, an Ice Wraith might leech some part of its target's soul to create a new, smaller Wraith. The Ice Wraith could even grow over time, perhaps after it kills its hosts and even other mortals and feeds on their essence, or perhaps has had more time to absorb natural elemental magic. This replication story wouldn't explain how the first Ice Wraith was ever made though. They may simply be a spirit of nature with some odd behaviors, but it's also still possible they're formed from those who died in highly emotional circumstances, like Snow Elves specifically, a race we said could live comfortably in icy caverns. Then the replication occurring by inhabiting a mortal is just an extra way of reproducing beyond that. Another location outside of the Forgotten Vale, called Bonechill Passage, contains another Ice Wraith guaranteed to be there, also found around skeletons. While it may also be formed from one of their spirits, following this idea of a ghost-like creation that could involve interaction with the surrounding natural elements, another possibility could be that these Ice Wraiths are here next to skeletons because they simply killed these targets after being implanted inside them. In the same way that certain parasitic entities plant eggs inside a target, which hatch and then eat the host, an Ice Wraith could have entered an adventurer, just like in Kyne's challenge, only to birth a smaller Ice Wraith within, which kills the weakened host on the way out or shortly after with the help of the parent Wraith. Whitbane was described in Herbane's Bestiary as a curse of infection that dulls the intellect and makes the target even more the victim, which would make it easier for Ice Wraiths to defeat their host. Not all adventurers are lucky enough to travel in groups, let alone with a skilled group of warriors. Looking for more clues, I did come across this Ice Wraith concept art, which is covered in ideas. Most noteworthy here is the one saying Ice Shard Remoras follow main body, and more Wraiths summoned after first successful strike. While we don't see smaller Ice Wraiths clinging onto a larger one in-game, it is another reference point of the smaller Ice Wraith idea existing. Remoras is written in quotations, just so you know they meant it conceptually and weren't talking about actual fish. Though Remoras in our world do spend most of their lives clinging to a host like a whale or shark, with many believing that Remoras feed off particulate matter from their host's meals. It aligns with the host idea of the smaller Ice Wraith we discussed, and if you just wanted to stretch things for maximum speculation, you could even say the feeding on particulate matter idea aligns with the theory of feeding off a small part of the host's soul in its formation. The more Wraiths summoned after first successful strike idea does not specify how, though still fits the story of Fenrig in the sense that it was just summoned out of his body after the main Wraith passed through him. The note Hail of Shards Remoras finish after main pass also fits the concept of the smaller ones attacking the target after they've been spawned. I also love the note that says armor conductivity damage factor, as it would explain how painful it might be if an ice wraith traveling through a target chills one's armor to the point of the freezing metal harming the wearer. Upon death, ice wraiths leave behind an essence that one can use to resist frost. Imagine if such a freezing substance is actually left in one's body after an ice wraith inhabits it. It's absolutely chilling. Now, while all these skeletons we've looked at, even in the Forgotten Vale, could merely be the remains of dead hosts, this does not explain why the ice wraiths seem to stick around the body, making any origin theories about them far from simple one-step answers. One scripted ice wraith is found in Shalador's Maze, another in the Midden, though these could just be the result of mages getting up to their usual business. But more intriguing and worthy of investigation is the case of Serpent Stone Isle. Galmar Stonefist will tell you that men have tested their metal here for ages, and that you'll need to kill an ice wraith there to prove yourself worthy of joining the Stormcloaks.
It's a strange rock formation built by the ancients. Something about that place attracts the ice wraiths. You kill an ice wraith out there, and I'll have all the proof I need about you.
If you're below level 20, he'll give you a potion of resist cold and some specialized poison, Ice Wraith's Bane. Maybe there's fire salts inside, we don't get told. While we can't know what attracts ice wraiths to Serpent Stone Isle, it does tickle my curiosity that an icy spirit-like being taking on a serpentine form is attracted to the Serpent Stone. The ancient Nordic god, Orki, comes to mind. Orki is a primal death god of the Nords and is represented by a snake. However, he is generally not considered a god to worship, but rather a testing god that they fear. This enemy of the Nords could have something to do with ice wraiths having a serpentine form and being attracted to the ancient Serpent Stone Isle, and having served as a test for Nords to overcome for ages is very peculiar. Orki is also known to be a deceptive god, one who uses trickery to bring misery upon the Nords. Ice wraiths do, admittedly, exhibit some cunning behavior, hiding beneath the snow or near loot that's near those skeletons of the fallen and ambushing those who do not expect them. They may be manifestations of Orki's will in Skyrim's freezing environment. What do you think? They're even found hiding out at the Waynan Stones, another seemingly ancient site. A circle of stones surrounds a shrine of Talos, with a large stone-carved face of a man lying in ruins within the snow. The shrine to Talos is of course more recent, though could still be hundreds of years old. The two ice wraiths will ambush you together as you enter the circle, and after defeating them, I always wonder why they're there. Are they merely intelligent creatures that patiently wait to ambush travelers? Are they these elemental manifestations guarding places of natural and cultural significance? Could they be bitter Snow Elf spirits seeking to enact vengeance upon those Nords who worship Talos, a man who, like Isgrimor and the companions, brought great suffering to elves? Don't forget that the statue of Talos we see in Skyrim shows him standing over a defeated serpentine foe. We're never told who this serpent represents. Perhaps it is Orki, the testing god. If we dive deeper, there's one final, rather niche bit of lore to discuss regarding water within the Elder Scrolls universe. Herald Kazathi, a Dremora servant of Hermaeus Mora, can reveal to the player in the Elder Scrolls Online that when a mortal dies, their memories go into the water. She says, all the memories of Tamriel's history are stored in its waters, and goes on to say it's considered one of the most dangerous secrets about the natural order, and that apparently the details and implications of this secret are mind-spinning and would require a lifetime of study and contemplation. However, purely in regard to ice wraiths, beings seemingly formed of ice, which is frozen water, perhaps we could say that instead of spiritual essence, ice wraiths are galvanized purely by the memories of the fallen. This could imbue them with all kinds of viciousness, and potentially some could be understandably more bitter than others. Then again, if they're purely a spirit of their icy habitat, then their unrelenting, harsh behavior and the lethality they can bring out of nowhere could also be a representation of the dangerous, blizzard-filled climates they are birthed in. They're a very mysterious creature, and I'd really love to hear what you think about them. Another massive thank you to War Thunder for sponsoring this video. Don't forget to check it out using our links in the pinned comment or video description to play for free on PC, PlayStation, Xbox, or mobile. If you haven't played for 6 months or you're brand new, you'll get that chunky bonus pack on PC or console with multiple premium vehicles, in-game currency, and more. Subscribe for part 2 where I'll be covering more creatures or monsters. My name's Michael. Thank you so much for your support. Scott and I both really appreciate it, and I'll be back to nerd out with you again very soon.